All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're tackling something pretty profound. We're going deep on this idea of inner prisons.
Ooh, inner prisons.
Yeah, it's from Pastor Yvan Castanou's book.
Breaking Free.
Breaking Free, that's the one.
Hey.
And honestly, I think this is something we can all relate to on some level.
Absolutely.
Have you ever felt like stuck, like held back by, your own thoughts, your own feelings? That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Yeah, those invisible barriers we put up for ourselves.
Exactly. And get this, our source material today, it's not the book itself, it's actually this really cool podcast.
Oh, a podcast?
Yeah, and it's in French. They were discussing Castanou's book.
Wow, so it's like a global book club kind of thing.
Right, and they actually encourage listeners to go and grab the English translation too.
That's awesome. I love how they are really emphasizing making sure people have access to this.
Yeah, and the podcast host really stresses how important it is to share this information, especially with people who are struggling.
It makes you wonder, what is it about these inner prisons that makes this so important to share?
Right, that's a good question. And I think to even get into that, we need to first try and figure out,
what are they?
Yeah, what are these inner prisons? How can we even identify them? It seems kind of abstract,
It does, but the podcast actually gives a pretty good example. They were talking about someone who's constantly worried.
Oh, about what other people think.
Yeah, exactly. And so because of that worry, they're held back from actually doing things they really want to do, like pursuing their passions.
Oh, so their fear is the prison.
Yeah, it becomes a prison. And the bars are made of their own thoughts.
That's such a powerful image. But, okay, how is that different from just, good old-fashioned self-reflection?
That's a great question. I think the key here is whether those thoughts are helping you to grow and improve.
Or if they're just keeping you stuck.
Exactly. Are they motivating you to act or just trapping you in this cycle of negativity and inaction?
Oh, that makes sense. So it's about the outcome, whether the thoughts lead to positive change or not.
Yeah, I think so. If it's the latter, if it's just keeping you stuck, then you might be dealing with an inner prison.
Okay, that's a good framework to think about it.
Yeah.
Now, the podcast also brings in this whole other dimension. They talk about God's grace.
Oh, interesting.
And they say it's part of this process of breaking free.
So it's not just about willpower.
It seems like there's this spiritual element too. Maybe it requires a certain degree of surrender or acceptance, a belief in something beyond ourselves.
That adds a whole other layer to it, doesn't it?
Definitely. It makes you wonder how our spirituality or faith plays into these inner prisons we create for ourselves.
I like that.
So for everyone listening out there, I want you to really think about this for a second. What are some of the beliefs you're holding on to that might actually be limiting you?
Yeah. What are the whispers of doubt or fear that might be holding you back from going after what you really want?
That's the big question here. And I think the way the podcast frames it is super powerful.
How so?
They ask, what if those inner prisons were suddenly visible? Imagine if they were made of concrete and steel.
Whoa, that would be intense.
Right. Would you even recognize them? And if you did, how would you start to break free? Where would you even begin to chip away at those walls?
That's the challenge Castanou is putting forth, isn't it? It's about recognizing these prisons, but more importantly, it's about finding a way to dismantle them brick by brick.
And I think that's what's so powerful about this whole concept of inner prisons. It gives us this framework for understanding our own limitations and for starting to break free from them.
It's almost like a blueprint for personal liberation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the bars and then figuring out how to unlock the door.
And maybe even realizing that we hold the key all along.
Yeah, I like that. Food for thought, everyone. Food for thought.
And a great place to start if you want to delve deeper into this whole idea is to check out Castanou's book.
Welcome to this video where we will explore how to recognize the fortresses or inner prisons that prevent us from fully living according to divine principles. A fortress is any habitual thought that is contrary to what God expects from us. For example, wanting to be holy but feeling drawn to impurity. God expects us to be joyful, grateful, and loving, but often we are besieged by thoughts of sadness, discouragement, and hatred. When you experience a real inner struggle to practice God's principles, it is a sign that a fortress has been built within you. James 1 verse 22 tells us to practice the word and not deceive ourselves with false reasoning. A false reasoning is a persistent thought that prevents us from following God's commandments. For example, when God tells you to give, an inner voice tells you that you will have nothing left. This is a fortress of poverty. To recognize and demolish these fortresses, we must carefully study the scriptures and align our thoughts with divine principles. Be aware that whenever you struggle to obey a divine principle, you're facing a fortress. But with faith and perseverance, these fortresses can be demolished.